up and running. So as Justin said, I'm Kathleen Duffy from Smith Group, and I'm kind of our team captain. So I'm kind of coordinating all of the various pieces and trying to make sure everything works together. As part of our team, we have Katrina Kelly-Pitou, who is remote and will be presenting. She's an expert on resiliency and climate and energy and economics. We've got Ryan Myers-Johnson, who you'll meet in a moment, who is helping lead our public engagement. We have others that are remote that might be watching on our team back home, Alex, Jen, and Mark, as well as a whole team supporting each of us. So we're a big group that is really excited to work with you. So you'll get to see various versions of us on virtual meetings coming up. So we kind of want to set the stage. Again, like Justin said, this is really for us to share what we've learned thus far and work with you to come up with some expectations for what you want to make sure that we accomplish during this master planning process. We're going to go briefly through the schedule, through some existing conditions and data, but really want to focus most of the time on discussing these issues with you. So we wanted to meet with you sooner rather than later in the process, knowing that a lot is happening in the city. We know how busy city staff is. We know how many projects are going on. A lot of people love Ferndale, want to move here or work here. So there's a lot that we want to make sure coming to you together, we can have some shared set of values and goals to lead our effort. So before we go around and quickly do some introductions, I just want to set the stage again that these are 3 plans that are integrating multiple processes. So to us, success is having an inclusive, equitable process that firmly roots this plan in equity and inclusion, as well as elevating sustainability. So the last plan had a sustainable thread throughout all of it, and we're excited to add an added layer of climate action and resiliency on top of that to echo the Council's commitment to action on climate change. So with that, I'm going to toss it to Ryan, urban planning consultant with Smith Group, and success for me is that we give you a plan that you feel like you own and that is the community's plan and is implementable. So with that, I'm going to have Ryan have you all introduce yourselves and say what success looks like.
Oh, thank you, Kathleen. Can you all hear me? Okay. So as Kathleen said, my name is Ryan Myers-Johnson, and I'm really excited to join this team to really think about how do we do exciting and interesting engagement. We've been to so many community meetings, but how do we really bring people into this process in an exciting and fun way? And also, how do we introduce empathy into this process and hear some of those hot button issues and discussions in a way that's productive and feels good for residents and city alike. So I guess I get the honor of asking you to tell us more about who you are, what your position is, and then specifically what success might look like to you in a big picture. So for me, success looks like an equitable process in which residents can become champions of the plan and more than kind of armchair critics, but they feel that they have the power, and the reality is that they do have power to shape where things are going. And so let's just go around. Maybe we can start with Deborah. If you want to just go ahead and jump into what is success, or what does a vision of success look like for you with these master plans? And then you can just pass it on down the line.
Hi, Deb Brazen, Planning Commission. Deb Brazen, Planning Commission. Success would be, like you said, community engagement and having a master plan that we can implement that is understood and accepted and embraced by the community and those that we're working with.
Good evening. My name is Brittany Haskew-Kramer, and I'm also on the Planning Commission. And success for me would be an accessible document that folks who have participated in the process can see their input in and see how they can take action from the document.
Hi, I'm Dustin Hagfors with the Planning Commission. Probably success to me would be collaboration and action. Active participation, active voices from all different walks of life, all working together to create a plan together.
Hi, Laura Mikulski, City Council. Pretty much echoing the sentiments of everybody else. If we get citizen voices involved, then I'm a happy camper, and I think that's a successful plan.
My name is Matt Showalter. I'm a commissioner, and success for me is a master plan that embodies the values of the community.
Hi, I'm Kate Baker. I chair the Planning Commission. And a successful plan, in addition to what my colleagues and council people have just said, also really sets our community up for success in the long term. I think that's the great thing about combining our climate action plan, our master planning, and our parks planning, so we're looking forward in a number of ways.
Hi, I'm Melanie Piana. I'm the mayor and wanted to echo a lot of what I'm hearing as well. Our plan reflects our values. It is definitely driven by the community. But I'm also looking for community resilience as part of moving forward, and that our plan reflects that as well. There's a lot of changes happening globally in communities, and I think having our plan that is realistic and implementable is something I think the community is looking for as well.
Hi, I'm Michelle Foster. I'm on the Planning Commission. Success for me would look a lot like what everyone else is saying. I agree with all the sentiments. Furthermore, I would say that I would like to really hear and understand what the community vision is from a variety of our community residents, so that we can resolve and have a unified goal and vision that would help give the Planning Commission direction, so that we can make choices that reflect that community vision.
Hi, I'm Krista Azar, Planning Commissioner, and in addition to everything, my vision for success is to have something that communicates clearly what we want to do, so it's not just something that you know, when you open it, you can grasp what the ideas are. I want to see the bar set really high, but I also want it achievable, so that we're not just nudging along, but that we're really seeing great changes possible.
I'm Kat Bruner-James, a City Council member, and in addition to all of the goals that have been stated tonight, success to me would be addressing and seeking to repair systems, policies, and decisions that have harmed our poorest community members, people of color, and other marginalized members of our community.
Good evening, Raylon Leaks May, Ferndale City Council. Success to me means that what I find to be successful is that we're coming up with a plan comprised of input from community members and commissions and council alike, and that we'll be able to see that plan come to fruition and know that we put it together, all together, and that we can benefit from the rewards of coming together and working in a positive and collaborative fashion.
And I'm Greg Pollica, I'm City Council member as well as the representative on the Planning Commission. And success to me is a final plan that represents the wants and desires of the community, and that the community can be proud about.
Thank you so much, everyone, for those amazing contributions. I heard so many good things, from actions to citizen values being at the forefront of the plan. It sounds like everyone really wants residents to have a really strong voice in this plan. I heard some really interesting thoughts too about resilience, long-term success, and then also repairing harm that was done. So as we go deeper into the process tonight in our discussions, keep those visions in your mind and how you can start to implement them. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kathleen.
Thanks. Okay, thanks everyone. So a quick overview of our schedule and process. So this diagram is long and complicated, and that's because this is a complicated process, but we're gonna try and make it as simple to the public and you all to understand as possible. Ultimately, there are three big phases. So in phase one, which we're in right now, it's really trying to understand. We've worked in the city before, some of us live near the city, and so we have some ideas of what's been going on, but really trying to be that third party that can come in, look at data, read old plans, read old minutes from meetings, news articles, and just really try to immerse ourselves into all of the happenings that have been going on and discussions and topics, as well as why we're here tonight is to set the stage for public engagement, which is going to start to come in a month or so. As part of that, I wanted to just go over some quick ways that the public is going to be involved. Obviously, we're in a challenging time still, as we're all here masked up in person, but grateful to have a hybrid option. We're going to try and continue to do hybrid, but probably lean a little bit more heavily on the virtual side of things, just to err on the side of caution. So we would invite you to go to planferndale.com. It's a nice shortcut to the city's website, where you can see the website in progress, and we're looking forward to continuing to add things there along the way. We will have a discussion board that will show up there. We're going to be training facilitators. Part of our steering committee is going to get trained and facilitate small group conversations that can be either in person or virtual, so you can sign up for those. We're going to have pop-ups at community events and around town, and staff is willing to have some one-on-one coffee chat type office hour chats. So there's a lot of different things that we're going to be doing, online surveys. So just stay tuned on all of the city's social media platforms, but check out that website. We'll keep that very up to date. And the biggest push for our first round of public engagement is going to be a community summit held in October, where we're going to dig deep into issues. So that will be held on October 26th and 27th. We're finalizing the time, but likely to be late afternoon and evening, where Ryan and our team will be leading everyone through conversations on 3 key topics related to our plan: the parks, climate, and land use plan. And so we'll also be launching, hopefully in October, are those kind of small group conversations and exercises. And we'll come back and circle back to the public. The holidays is always a hard time, rightly so, to get people's feedback on things. So we'll be busy working on strategies and pulling together a plan during the holiday season, and probably circle back in January or February with draft concepts to vet with the public, and really evaluating those priorities, with then adoption in the spring. And how we've started to structure how we're getting input from the public, and what we want to start here with you tonight, has already begun. So we've met with the steering committee once already, and we have another meeting with them next week. They're providing a wide variety of input from both city staff, representatives from each of the commissions, and some residents as well. And so they've helped us kind of prepare for some of the content in tonight's meeting. But we look forward to having these conversations with the public in that first kind of round, thinking about what are we committed to. So what are those strong values? What does it mean for Ferndale to plan for the future? Then we come around for that extra set of priorities, and digging a little bit deeper in that October Community Summit, and finally following up with more about how do we balance all of these priorities and set out that action strategy for what the city should focus on first. So overall, our process, we're trying to make it as easy to understand as possible. It's hard with 3 projects that are all simultaneously working together towards this. But I want to reiterate again the social side of equity and inclusion being a substantial foundation upon which this entire process and plan will be led. I think Ferndale's leading the way in the state, but still has a lot of work to do on that front. So we want to make sure that every single recommendation we come up with, strategy, is reflecting that priority from the city and its residents, as well as this idea of we have a ticking time clock with climate, and not trying to be doom or gloom, but using that as a means to spur economic growth, to transform our neighborhoods into neighborhoods of the 21st century that are ready to go on that front. So those are kind of the 2 really driving forces: the social foundation and the ecological ceiling. But then we're going to deep dive with you next into who we are, and really cementing those values. And then we'll get into the what are we going to do about it and the actions later on in the process. So with that, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Katrina, if we can make sure she's able to be heard and unmuted.
I think I should be here. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, great.
Terrific. Well, thanks so much for the introduction, Kathleen, and I'm sorry not to be there, everyone. But as Kathleen said, my name is Katrina Kelly P2. Probably appropriate for this evening, even more so, considering me kind of the wizard behind the screen of climate change, if you will. It's really exciting overall to be here talking about your plan today. And a lot of what I'm going to be doing in the next few slides is going to be a little bit dense, but it's also hopefully going to be exciting. Everyone in City Council, but especially Aaron and Justin, already working within the City of Ferndale, have already done quite a lot of work on climate change. So a lot of my job in this plan is to help really understand where we are today and where we're going into the future, as Kathleen said. It's a really pivotal time. Hopefully everyone saw this year's IPCC report or that report on climate change, but we know 2030 is coming up quickly. So a lot of the actions that we're going to lay out in the plan today are going to help us really set a stage for some really inclusive and really valuable growth for the City of Ferndale itself. So a quick reminder, I'm so excited for this project because you're literally helping to connect the global to the local. The City of Ferndale itself is a member of ICLEI, or the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. As a reminder, as a community and with the authority of the mayor, you have committed to really demonstrating what climate action success is. And that doesn't mean just signing on the dotted line, as you already have done, but this exact type of plan is really going to identify the exact incremental changes that Ferndale needs to take to really build that solid social, environmental, and economic platform for growth. One thing that it means to join ICLEI is that you're actually not only going to be sharing your success with other Michigan communities, helping to demonstrate what leadership looks like, helping to demonstrate what coalitions for change looks like, but you're also going to be reporting to the international community. The work that we do here is already going to provide really strong groundwork for what we call COP, or the Conference of the Parties, in November. So if it feels a little bit like, oh, there's a lot of numbers coming at me, it's because we're unfortunately on a bit of a deadline here. But that's okay, because it's making us go through the numbers, have a strong understanding of where you are right now, and just identifying really quantitatively what are going to be the substantial shifts that you can undergo as a community. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so bear with me as we get through these numbers. And if anybody has questions, Kathleen, I'm going to ask you to sort of be my eyes on the ground, if you will.
Sounds good.
Perfect. Okay, so what do we know? Whenever we look out to 2030, we know that we've got to reduce carbon emissions, if you will. Carbon emissions are just a really nice, tangible way of being able to measure environmental impact, if you will. When people say why carbon, et cetera, we tend to say it's a really just concrete unit for measuring economic activity, if you will. So whenever you hear about carbon, don't think just energy, think about it as how we're measuring the impact of your economic activity. Today, we're looking at already a little bit lower of a baseline that you would see for a lot of communities. So this should already be a celebration. We see about 250,000 megatons of carbon. If Ferndale continues its normal kind of business as usual growth, by 2030, you are going to substantially reduce all the way down to 164,000 tons. Well, thanks for that circle. But here's a little bit of the oomph, if you will. When we look at the international deadlines that we're facing, when we're thinking of really the challenges that our children need to be protected from in terms of carbon, we actually need to get Ferndale down to about 94,000 tons of carbon. In totality, this represents about 63% of total reductions. Now, what this means is you don't have to just reduce your energy use intensity. We're going to walk you through the steps on how this master plan itself can help to sort of transition and move your entire activities of growth, but also operation as a community towards really a positive environmental change framework. So what we've already done are kind of identifying what those substantial reductions are. I'm going to walk you through those on the next few slides so that we can really also start getting you thinking as council members of some of the bigger legislative and regulatory moves that need to happen, but also then maybe some of those strategic outreach that needs to happen. Ferndale is absolutely not alone in charting this path. So knowing that a lot of your interaction on how you make that reduction is going to come from coordination with things like public utilities, from working exactly in direct partnership with your residents itself. It's just going to be really important in the next 6 months or so for us to really work together to identify with the top-down so that we make sure that we don't create any further economic burden on any of the residents. So those are some of the things that we're going to be focusing on the next few months itself. In terms of this action plan, what this is going to do is this going to, focusing on climate change through the lens of a master plan, are really going to give us some development standards, if you will. They're going to give some goals for how buildings should be built, for how much additional green space there should be or should already be protected. It's going to point to some of where those vulnerabilities are occurring physically, of where climate change and issues like flooding, etc., are already starting to take a toll on surfaces across the community. It's going to point to where bike lanes can be further connected so that we can get people away from cars even further and continue to celebrate the success that you're already having on the ground. But what's really important here too is this is going to also point to the familiarity with sustainability that you and your community have. We're going to really use this plan as a tool to engage with citizens and to really transition Ferndale into not just the wonderful place you know and love it today, but the place that you want to keep it wonderful for future generations. So here's some of these big hits, if you will, that come out of our data and analysis. A big thing to know here is that the grid itself is one of the main bad guys, if you will. And I know that this is actually a scary conundrum for those of us in deregulated utility markets. But looking at DTE's grid, it's simply not happening fast enough. We see carbon emissions reductions in your broader grid happening by about 50% by 2030. We actually need to go to 80%. This means two things. One, you can push on the utility and help encourage them to transition quicker. Or two, that means we've got to move away from relying on the utility a little bit and start identifying where things like residential solar, even residential battery installations start to make more sense. We want to get away from just relying on what is still looking like a predominantly coal-based grid in Michigan. The interesting thing, though, is still looking at overall efficiency in vehicles as part of this goal. Even though the electric grid itself, as I said, is decarbonizing a bit slower than we needed to, when we look at vehicle efficiency of an electric vehicle as compared to a standard combustion vehicle, we still see quite a large delta T difference there. So it's going to be really important for all Ferndale residents to just reduce their vehicular mileage as much as possible, whilst at the same time transitioning electric vehicles towards about 15% of the population by 2030. Good news for that one, by the way, is market dynamics show that is likely to happen anyway. The next one. A really fun one for me is new commercial buildings, if you will. Commercial buildings show that we need a bit of a reduction already. We need to reduce the energy use intensity, but by about 5% of existing square feet. But when we look at new commercial buildings, we actually have to get quite aggressive with how they're being built in terms of standardization. New buildings that come online need to be more in line with what we call the 2030 district goals. We've got to be about 37% more efficient in overall operations. So this can mean better things like window glazing, like tighter roofs, more creative facades, handling the direction of your buildings themselves, but also installing things like electric boilers, furnaces, etc. Speaking of electric boilers, etc., a big thing that comes out here is we've got to require 100% of electrification of new commercial buildings. Now, this word requires specifically for you as a city council. Perhaps the word we want to use with commercial builders is encourage the development of 100% electrification of new commercial buildings, if you will. Whenever buildings are coming online, though, and considering the age of infrastructure life that happens in terms of traditional furnaces, etc., we've got to get that gas-fired heating really out of the equation. It's a substantial portion of your emissions. Now, overall, something that Kathleen actually reminded me of that continues to be a surprise to people all over, especially the Florida climates that we live in, and that's really the role of residential buildings. Whenever we look at residential heating and residential overall energy use intensity, it's a huge portion of your community's mission. For me, this is exciting though. Behavioral change can really encourage the reduction of energy use intensity. So here, this is exactly where people like Ryan and Kathleen and I are going to be working with you to help educate your community members on how more sustainable behaviors and actually retrofitting their own homes can help to really reduce energy use intensity by about 20%. But still, same thing for a new residential build. 100% electrification has to happen. I've got to tell you, it's much easier to get commercial development to go towards 100% electrification than it actually is in residential. In my personal experience, I couldn't recommend more working with a public utility on things like rebate programs. This is really where you want to incentivize that behavior because homeowners tend to get harder with these bills than a commercial developer can tend to afford. So just in summary, as I said, we're seeing about 63% reduction per capita in total emissions reductions. If I was there in person, I'm sure there'd be a lot of eyebrows raised right now, a lot of concern. It would be scary. But what I could always tell people is a lot of behavioral change can handle about 50% of that 63%, if you will. So if you tend to think about what are the technical and infrastructure changes we need to happen, let's call it about 30%, if you will. There's some big obstacles that I think are going to be exciting for you to tackle, but we're working with partners like the local communities of Ann Arbor, of Royal Oak, of even the city of Detroit and the future Oakland County. Tackling grid decarbonization is honestly going to be pretty difficult to handle, but it's going to be fun to do it. So I really applaud you as a community. I think you're going to be able to do things big, but it's going to require coordination with DTE. EVs are already happening. The rebates are out there. That one's going to be a low-hanging fruit. But otherwise, especially from a council perspective, working with you guys to understand what's available on the table in terms of setting those standards and really creating the legislation that you need to incentivize positive behavior change is really going to be important.
Awesome. Thanks, Katrina. I'm going to keep the ball rolling. We'll have time to ask her some questions in a bit, unless there's anyone that has like a pressing question for Katrina right now. It's a lot to take in. I'll say that when I first saw that 63% number, I was like, oh boy, here we go. Let's work on this. So what's exciting though is that you're updating your land use master plan at the same time. And so your existing plan already has, like I mentioned earlier, a commitment to sustainability and already had some climate action strategies that the city has already been working on and residents have already been working on. The recently completed Ferndale Moves plan is supporting that. The equitable housing, inclusive housing policy also supports that. So there's already a lot of movement in the right direction. We just want to make sure that when we update this plan, that it has maybe an even stronger stance to help achieve some of those climate goals. Some of the other things that came out of our quick just review of your plan is looking at how much the city's already built out. So there's only so much that we can do with new building. It's going to happen with redevelopment. So continuing to have redevelopment strategies that meet the needs and can help meet some of those targets, and looking at these redevelopment sites that were identified in the previous plan. Some of them have been built, but not all of them have since this last plan was adopted. So integrating equity and inclusion and climate through all of that, just elevating them even more as we look to strengthen the previous master plan. We also want to make sure that we're aligning the parks plan at the same time, and the parks staff is really pleased with how that plan has functioned. They're a small but mighty group, and I think you as residents really appreciate the proximity of a lot of parks to things, and we just want to make sure that we start thinking a bit more about how parks can serve multiple purposes. I think with the restrictions of the pandemic, we've all had a renewed interest in being outside and not cooped up in our houses. So how can we elevate that a little bit more? So I'm going to turn it over to Ryan. Come join me up here.
Thank you, Kathleen. So we did learn a number of things from the previous plan, and one is that the good thing is that parks are located at an equal distance to many residents. However, connectivity issues are there. So as we think about spatial equity, how can we infuse more equity into people connecting, residents getting to this park? So that's thinking about what are the barriers of access, from accessibility issues to any sort of perceived barriers around cultural issues, bringing people into the parks. We also heard good things that bike lanes have made huge progress, but how can we integrate equity more in general? So that's what we'll be looking at moving forward. Also, we're really excited about thinking about parks and green space as a place for learning. How can we utilize park pavilions as educational centers, as centers for community and education? And with that, I'm also going to pass it back to Kathleen to talk more about our community values.
Yeah, just quickly. So in looking through your existing plans and everything that's been done recently to date, there are all these different initiatives going on in city plans, and each of these different initiatives has their own set of goals or strategies and guiding principles. And so our first step in this process is to try and bring all those together and come up with where we found common links throughout things. So we're about to jump into our first big discussion with you, so get ready. So in pulling out all of those recently adopted plans, looking at your previously adopted Parks and Rec and master plans and trying to figure out how best to integrate all of those, I just want to note that the previous master plans key values were progressive, equitable, sustainable, and resilient. And those found their way both into the Parks Plan. Ferndale Moves has a comparable set of priorities into the affordable housing strategy, and most importantly, City Council's strategic plan. So they periodically meet and update their strategic plan, and you can tell that their strategies were really built on the foundation of that master plan from 5 years ago. But we see that there's some opportunities to potentially add some values. So in talking with the steering committee, they helped us brainstorm some other words that we think might be elevated into more additional values to help guide this process. So with that, I'm going to toss it back to Ryan to discuss with you if these are the right words and how they translate to a vision.
Great, so we've got these really exciting words: progressive, equitable, resilient, sustainable, inclusive, healthy, thriving, and connected. So first there's a question, are those the right words? I'm assuming these are all really great words, but as we talk, if there's something that you want to add as a key value for this plan moving forward, please throw that in. But let's just think about these, if you agree with these, if you could pull out one of these values and paint a picture for us of how the master plan can tangibly embody one of these principles. I'd like to hear from everyone so that we can utilize these visions in the overall strategy as we go forward with community members. So for example, if I want to think about a plan that is equitable, how do I specifically make that happen? So for example, Ferndale will be made more equitable by committing to ADA standards for accessible design in our park system. So please just take a second, look at those, and think about, what have you already been thinking about, and how can these values be specifically embodied in the plan moving forward? And if we get a brave soul to volunteer and let us know what that vision is and what you'd like us to start really working towards and having discussions with residents about, that would be awesome. Yes.
I'm going to cheat because we kind of already did it, but it'll get us rolling. Ferndale can be made more resilient by incorporating the highest level of electrification and stormwater management principles into our zoning ordinance.
Awesome. Thank you.
I can keep going.
Please.
Ferndale can become more inclusive by changing the types of housing that are allowed to broaden and densify the types of housing that can be built in our R1 and R2 districts.
That's awesome. So now I'm going to cut you off. You got two. Oh, yes. Please.
Thriving. by bringing and encouraging different individuals, economically difficult, I can't talk. Bringing a variety of economical families, their abilities to thrive in this community, to come to this community, having means to, and I don't know what I'm trying to say, I'm trying to pull it together.
I think I hear you.
Okay, because I'm trying to pull it together here, give me a minute. Okay. Just so that we can all thrive, and I want more people to be able to come to this community to see what we find, what we're so proud of, and for them to feel welcome, and for them to want to live here and raise their children here.
Yes.
I find that we're losing instead of gaining, so I would like to see us gaining.
Yeah, so I think I heard you want to see people from a diversity of socioeconomic backgrounds coming to Ferndale, understanding that they have opportunity here, and then having opportunities to thrive and become successful.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. That was great. Yes, please, Dustin.
For sustainable, I think it not only has been discussed about having it be environmentally friendly, but also sustainable as in financially friendly as well. So we obviously need to make changes for the future, but if we start getting out of grasp of what people can afford to be here for it, none of the people that are trying to shape the future are going to be able to see it here. So we need to be sustainable financially.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll go next. So Ferndale can become a more healthy community by creating programs that draw the community into our parks to engage in active programming.
So I would like to see the master plan embody us being connected by cataloging the way that we are connected, for example, with our welcoming community or neighborhoods and our various public programs and festivals and et cetera. And then how we can build on that connectivity. I guess I would also add like bike lanes and transportation, just all the ways that we're connected and how we can build on what's already existing to become a more connected community that is inclusive and equitable as well.
Awesome. Yes, please.
I don't know if this would be resilient or sustainable or both, but localizing resources. So developing strategies so that we can have those the electrification, solar panels, localizing waste management, composting, things of that nature.
I'll go. Ferndale is a more inclusive community by creating mixed income neighborhoods. Similar to Kate's point, but really continuing to build on that in not only the types of residential structures or residential units that are offered, but also how they might be subsidized or to support the various residents. And then I'm vacillating between several words here, but maybe sustainable for our business community. So creating a built environment that is connected. I might be stealing a few other words here, but walkable and accessible for small businesses to thrive. Ooh, I think I used like 4 of them there.
I think you're using the most.
Yeah.
I think that if we, with connected, that we don't see this ending at our borders, so that we're setting up, so that we're inspiring the neighbor, where the border changes across the street, it's Oak Park or Hazel Park or Pleasant Ridge or other, that we're thinking bigger, that what we're setting up might go beyond our borders.
for resilient, that we create flexibility in our systems, including our built environment and our financial systems to enable us to be able to bounce back from shocks in our system.
Yes.
I'll build off of that one too, because that's a good one. I think we've learned a lot about adaptability and how cities have to be flexible in order to shift when priorities change because of environmental impacts. But for me, sustainable is a big word, and encompasses a lot of different categories. But I'm going to go on the financial one. You know, these are some big goals that the community is facing with the carbon reduction. And I think for me is, you know, I ask more strategic questions, is how is our city changing? What is our city's low-hanging fruit to hit these goals? And then where do we need partners in a way that perhaps we haven't had partners before? And I see that as resilient and sustainable. And that might not look like what we've done in the past going forward.
Wonderful. Has everyone shared?
I haven't, and I'm struggling with coming up with a vision. But one of the things that I'm stuck on a little bit is the healthy word, because I feel like depending on the context, that can actually be exclusionary to people for whom health is not sustainable.
Hey, Kat, can you talk into the mic?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was saying that I'm hung up a little bit and distracted by the word healthy, because depending on the context, that can be exclusionary for people for whom health is not attainable. And I'm trying to figure out a way of reconciling accessibility, you know, providing resources and meeting people where they're at, but also understanding the good intention of healthy parks, and, you know, healthy can go beyond sort of a medical definition. But I can't quite figure out a vision to put together to either shift that word or frame it or use a different word.
I'm really glad that you added that, because I do think we can very easily shift into some really ableist language. And so it's something that we can take back to the steering committee and rethink, especially with the times that we're living in now. So this is an excellent contribution. And if anyone else has any words, because the first question too is, are these the right words that we should be using as we go deeper into this engagement process? So thank you very much.
Just thinking about about healthy in terms of as well, but it's in terms of something that comes up from the Planning Commission all the time is parking over and over again. And how can we emphasize walkability and reductions in parking? Because there's for areas that are meant to serve as more of a community node instead of a destination. So how can we work in parking reductions for areas that may not be able to handle extra parking?
Thank you.
That's actually quite interesting, because that was one of the things that I was thinking about in going into this meeting, was the whole idea of being more flexible in our parking requirements. For example, what we had to deal with a few weeks back with the request for the business on West Marshall, and being flexible in that this business isn't like a lot of other business, and we can't treat certain parking requirements just overall. You have to look at each situation differently and the impact that that business will have on parking. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Great. We'll have more time too to reflect on parking and some of the things that were identified in the previous master plan and how we want to change things potentially moving forward. Would anyone else like to make a contribution to this conversation about these values?
At this point, it's just for the Planning Commission and City Council. There'll be a public
comment period after the workshop.
Thank you. My apologies in not being clear, because everyone is in this room in terms of the U table.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention the public comment period at the beginning, but this is like a normal public meeting. And it's on the agenda, thank you. So I was just gonna add, Ferndale is progressive. If our intention is to meet this climate goal, we're gonna have to come up with some amazing outreach programs, particularly to the residents and to businesses, to show how that's attainable and how the city's going to support that goal and the communal achievement of that goal.
That's awesome.
With sustainable, how can we use sustainability to actually make a visual impact as well, to show the values towards sustainability as well? Because, I mean, I think that there's a lot of great things that you can do sustainably that aren't visible as well, but how can we use that to kind of reinforce community values as well visibly?
Great. So I guess we should probably go on to the next slide. This was really a great beginning of discussion, and as we go deeper with residents, we'll be talking more about these items. So just going on. So as we've identified, there is a lot that can happen in these three plans, from looking at spatial equity to looking at climate change and how do we actually make that happen, to parking, to housing development, to health outcomes. And so really, as we work with you and residents, it's going to be a balancing act of how we can think about the commitments that we want to make, the priorities of residents, and then what are actually the resources to make those actions happen. So that's the delicate balance we'll be in. And so just going a little bit deeper into some opportunities for discussion, I want to just go through some of the goals from the last master plan, and then we're going to discuss how some of these things got implemented, and then what went well and what can we do differently moving forward. So some of the goals included creating a framework for responsible supportive parking facilities. And so we also asked ourselves, what does that mean? What is a responsible parking facility? And then how does it relate to community desires? Also looking at pursuing and encouraging new housing development opportunities. One of the things that has come up several times is you're thinking about equity. You want growth, but you don't want to outpace your residents in terms of how much these things cost. You don't want a little San Francisco over here in Southeast Michigan. So then what also does it mean to promote a balanced mixed-use downtown, especially as we're moving really progressively into these new climate actions? Also, what does it mean to develop long-term opportunities for new public spaces? And who are those public spaces serving? Again, strengthening walkability, accessibility, and connectivity. And then lastly, utilize public projects to implement and promote sustainable design and raise awareness within the community. So some of those goals around communication, getting the word out, outreach, that was there in your previous master plan. And so looking at some of the recent projects that would have been affected by the previous master plan, let's have a discussion about, did these projects achieve the goals that were outlined in the previous master plan? And then in addition to that, what could have been done differently that we want to think about as we move forward? So we have the 409 on 9, Parkdale Towers, and the skate park. Of course, we had a lot of new developments, but we chose these three. Hopefully, we can have a discussion about some of these things. How is parking addressed here? Equity in housing, accessibility, public spaces, and walkability. So again, let's hear from everyone about, did these projects accomplish the goals as you envisioned them? And then what can we take away from those projects that we want to implement moving forward in order to accomplish community vision?
Can I just ask what the best way to kick this off is? Not all of our planning commissioners or even all of our council members were in their current positions when some of these projects came together.
Yeah.
I think a lot were, but not necessarily all. So does it make sense for like quick overview of what the project is and where? I'm sure people Googled if they didn't know, but.
I think that, so I'll let Kathleen chime in as well, but I think that it's a perfect opportunity for people to give their perspective. So if you were just a resident, you were not serving as a civil servant, you have a very particular view that may not have been influenced by being on this side of the table. But Kathleen, you can also add.
That's what I was going to say.
Okay, sure.
And we just picked a sampling, knowing that others are going to come up in conversation. But we want to dig in deep, understanding where some things may have gone well and might have achieved some of those goals, and where could we be doing better. So if there's another project that you really, really want to talk about, absolutely talk about it. We don't want to limit conversation, but we just picked a few that we thought would be good conversation starters.
Yeah, and the point here, I think, is really for us to learn so we know how to progress forward.
Where are those sticking points or those roadblocks to?
I guess I'll start off. So, like, looking at 4909, it definitely achieved the goal of providing a different kind of housing that wasn't readily available in Ferndale. It's rental, it's apartments with amenities, things that we didn't really have available in the state to begin with. However, I think it failed on the equity standpoint. Like you had referenced, this little San Francisco in southeast Michigan. When you look at the rents of those, there's nothing affordable about them. And based on the scale of the project, it was a real missed opportunity for getting some affordable housing mixed in with development as well.
Right, and so moving forward, you just want to see more mixed use, and not more mixed use, but affordable housing going forward.
On that scale, because it's really hard, what we struggle with a lot is, wanting the affordable housing, but when you have a small project that comes up that is a private owner trying to do it on their own, it's really unrealistic to expect them to try to meet the threshold for us as a community. But when you have a project that, really is just an entire city block, on that kind of a scale with that kind of a developer, anything like that should always include affordable housing as part of the mix.
That's an important, not to stay here, but I think that's definitely an important distinction to make when we're communicating with residents, because if there are constraints around these type of developments, important to know, because otherwise people are, why have we had these?
May I add some context there?
Yes, sure.
The developer pitched this project before our affordable housing policy was completed, so he was able to get through without being held accountable to the affordable policy because it was in development. I think it was a timing issue.
Yeah, for sure.
More than anything else.
Can you say how it might have changed had it come in after the housing policy?
Gosh.
Do we have the ability to require Jordan?
We'll ask our economic development professional.
Sure. You want me to speak into a mic?
You want to come here or go to Jordan?
You'll have to sit. I just do one of these. Hi, everybody. Jordan Torty, CED Director. What this would have done, if we would have had the policy on the books, our policy requires for any project that is 25 units or more, 25% of those units would have had to been provided at an affordable rate mix. And the way we do it is, of that 25%, we want to see a mix of 60, 50, and 80% AMI. So if that policy was on the books, we would have required that, because this project did receive incentives. So correct. So there are, there's 2 lanes. Thank you. There are 2 lanes by which we can require that under state law. That's either tax incentives or we've interpreted it locally. If they go for a PUD, we see that as an incentive, so we treat that as a threshold for putting those requirements on.
Yeah, I would just add that this was one of those projects that really pushed us to create the affordable housing plan.
Correct. The number of units would have been 30 on this project.
Yeah, I just want to stay on that project for a bit, recognizing your comment that there would be interest in getting feedback from residents' perspective, because that was another project that was approved before I joined the Planning Commission, and I walk past that development probably 3 or 4 times a day because I have a dog with a very weak bladder, and I see how the project aligns with a variety of goals, including increased green space and more permeable space on a development site. But I really felt that there was a missed opportunity there for pedestrian-oriented retail density on the site. And obviously, I work in real estate development and I sit on the planning commission, and so I hear about parking constantly, and so I can understand the site constraints. But what we build today changes pedestrian patterns for the lifetime of that building, and so that building and others really constrains us to how our downtown functions, our commercial corridors function, and how pedestrians are going to engage moving forward. And so I also think that, you know, looking at the square footage and footprint of some of those commercial spaces and talking about sustainability and resiliency, you know, working in economic development, I see those as economic development terms just as much as they are infrastructure terms. And so when you look at larger footprints like that, especially in an environment like we are in right now with COVID, that can be really challenging for a small business to tackle. And so those are my comments there. And I appreciate that there are policy and land use limitations that we had there from a planning commission standpoint. I'm simply just commenting from a resident who walks by there often.
So moving forward, can you just paint a picture of the type of developments that you'd like to see that incorporate some of these concerns that you have?
Yeah, so I appreciate the interest in increasing permeable space on a site, but I think that there might have been an opportunity to put that permeable space in other spots on the site and create a street wall that continues the downtown experience, which I think is represented in the master plan down along East 9 Mile. Yeah, that's my thoughts.
Thank you.
I'd like to chime in on that, on the same project while we're on it, because I live a half block away, so I walk my dogs by there often. So I'll echo a lot of the comments that have already been made. I think I'm in agreement with everything that's been said so far, and I would especially highlight and elevate the missed opportunity or lack of affordable housing component to it. I know that it just wasn't part of the policy at the time, but it's still such a huge development that's a real disappointment. On the positive side, I see so many folks from that building walking downtown and walking around the neighborhood. It has added a certain level of just sort of vibrancy and presence. Sometimes I walk home from City Hall at night, and it's nice to see people walking their dogs around as I'm heading home. On the issue of parking, this is one of those topics where, I live in an area where parking is such a tough issue and is such a pain point, but I also hate that it's guides everything and limits everything. But on this particular project, I will note that it's adjacent to Otis Supply, a business that I think relied on parking that was right on the corner that existed before that building. And now Otis Supply has a tent over their parking lot, adding extra pressure to that neighborhood. Again, not that that should guide anything exclusively, but it's an interesting pain point. But otherwise, the other thing that I will elevate, even though it's been said already, is it would have been nice to have more street-level retail or commercial or something to sort of extend the downtown. I think there's like one retail space, maybe two. Okay, but certainly not connected to the retail that's just a block over. It would have been nice to extend that a little more coherently.
If I may add, I would like to know.
Microphone, Verlon, please. Thank you.
If I may add, I would like to know regarding that 409 on the 9, yes, it missed the mark as far as affordability, and it, you know, it hurts, it pains me to see that. But I would like to know how many people, I mean, I don't know how many units are in that building. Did someone say 30?
No, 30 would have been affordable if our
30 would have been
if
affordable.
our requirements had been in place at that time.
And I would like to know then how many of those units are actually rented and being utilized. Do we?
My
It's full.
understanding is it's full, Raylon.
Okay, it's full.
127 units total.
127 units. So then there are some people that felt that that was affordable, and those are new residents that we have in our community. But yes, I'd like to see more flexible housing and more diverse housing in our community. But whereas it might have missed the mark as far as affordability, there are people in our residents that are utilizing our businesses and frequenting our downtowns that are living there. So there is a plus there. The skate park, from a community resident, I mean, I was involved when it was being built, but from a community resident perspective, I absolutely love it. I think it has brought our, our children and everyone kind of together to kind of gravitate and get physical activity in a spot that I think is just fantastic. I think it's probably one of the most creative things we've done here in Ferndale. And I think where we missed the mark is we didn't anticipate how much manpower it would be to maintain and watch over it, and keep the area clean. So, but I think that's something that we can all work together at. But I think it's a wonderful project, and I love that we've done it. I get rave reviews about it all of the time from people. So, let's continue to be more creative.
So I'm going to hit all three. 409, I do appreciate that we learned from one of our other projects about creating a more walkable front facade. I do understand the concerns about the green space and wishing that there was more retail. I do know that the owner didn't want to have any retail, and we kind of forced him into the retail that's there. But if I'm not mistaken, we also required that the green spaces have the utilities in place for future build in those green spaces. So 10, 15 years down the line, if Jordan corrects me if I'm wrong, 10, 15 years down the line, the builder could come in and actually build additional retail spaces on those green spaces.
Councilman, you are correct, actually. That is part of the discussion. One of the trade-offs that was part of that project was trading parking for additional retail, as well as the typical developer resistance to things that we asked for. But the compromise that we landed on was the entire first floor is all 14 feet, so that's standard commercial height. So what we did is we had them put utility connections in such a way that if we were ever willing to make that trade, they could add retail. And as a matter of fact, the Ferndale House building on the west side has the same opportunities where the steel lintels are. So we tried to future-proof where we could.
But that's more related to the parking configuration than the green space, because the green space is a green stormwater infrastructure engineering, so you're not necessarily building over a bioswale.
True.
You'd be building where those bump-ins happen.
Yeah. So I'm glad that we had that vision, for those projects. Parkdale Towns, we don't have a lot of townhomes in Ferndale, so I love that there's, additional housing opportunities, unique housing opportunities, and I'd like to see more of this type of housing in the city. Maybe not on this scale, but definitely these type of housings, maybe on over 2 or 3 lots. And then the skate park, I'm a bit biased. When I first came on council in 2014, I had 5 major projects that I wanted to do in parks, and skate park was one of them. And for 6 years, I kept pushing for a skate park. So, and I don't like skating, but I knew that everybody else did. So I wanted to make sure that we had something really awesome, and I'm glad we did it.
If I may, I will add on the 409 and the 9 because I've been the longest on council, and my learnings from the Ferndale House. And at the time, the Ferndale House was the first project, I think in 20, 30 years since Credit Union 1 had been built. And there was real pressure coming from the business community in the downtown to build more parking. And there was concern that if we had more intensity of use of our businesses in the downtown, more liquor type places, that would put pressure on the parking, which is why we put a parking in lieu of payment. Did I get that right? I always say it. But, damn it. Payment in lieu of parking. Sorry, I just. That's why that policy was put in place, sort of slow down the conversion over to more liquor establishments. And the Ferndale House development was the first one to get through. I think, was put pressure on our policy and zoning. And there was sort of a deal made that if you build retail in front, that would be great, but the business community didn't want to convert more parking over to retail. So that is why there is paintings on these front covers of Ferndale House, because there was a deal made with the developer when the deck was built, the DOT project, that the retail would be open and those parking spaces would be removed for retail. And that was the history of why that happened and why there's a lot of dead space there now. But I think now with the parking changes changed, the payment in lieu of parking, oh my, thank you. When that policy was removed, that developer hasn't been, asked to put the retail back in. So when I come back to 409 on the 9, I just see these big developers coming in and saying, I always say they find the gaps in our zoning to figure out how to make their project work for them and not the city. And it's the Planning Commission who holds them accountable to meet the goals of the community. And that's the challenge of being on the Planning Commission, is that it's a negotiation with the developer. That is where I feel like we are. We have a real reckoning with parking, because the Parkdale towns, while I love the condos and that we needed this type of housing, the neighborhood was concerned about parking. And so there were fewer units part of that deal in order to create more parking. But what that did was put the cost up of the units. So you're actually pricing people out of being lower, medium income to afford them. And I know this because that was my neighborhood, and the average price of a home was $150 to $175 before the big push. And basically, by saying lowering the units and more parking, we said that the price point for these are $200,000, and that's okay. When we wanted a lower price point, but we valued parking over the value of a condo. And so I think those are our reckoning conversations going forward with our master plan. And the Parkdale Towns homes, people love living there. I ask them all the time, and they do. And I'm glad they're there. But in terms of development and who are we developing for and what type of housing we're creating, it's either people or cars. And we always edge out and put more cars in instead of people.
Can we stay on that a sec? I'd like to hear more on that. It goes back to that balancing diagram, right? And I think as we're anticipating opening up to the public comment on, we're going to have a big, wide opportunity for the public to chime in on things. What are other examples of those trade-offs that have been made that we can come and work on explaining how those trade-offs have been made? Not to, Kat, you can chime back in on what you were going to talk about, but just keep that in mind. That's why we need to hear from you guys, is to make sure that we can translate where those trade-offs were made and where we need to strengthen them going further.
So I have a question about the Parkdale towns that might be either for Jordan or Planning Commission members. This is just a curiosity. I really like how those entries don't require 3 steps up like so many Ferndale homes. And I'm curious whether any of those units are laid out such that if there's a family member who either uses a wheelchair or older person or someone who can't or won't use stairs, so there's no way for some...
There's no first floor fully accessible bed and bath.
That's a bummer. Because we lack that in this community.
So,
all right.
And
I want to go back to your question earlier, but I just want to piggyback because I was actually going to say the exact opposite. While I do want more accessible units in the city of Ferndale, and I'm pro ADA compliance, you know, on the Planning Commission, we've reviewed several, I would say, small to mid-sized multifamily developments in the neighborhood. There's a few on Vester that we've seen, right? And that's always lively discussion from the neighborhood. And again, dog, weak bladder, I walk by those projects often. Many of them came in before I came on the commission. And I have a hard time articulating my real challenge with those projects until I've seen some of them built now. And I think for me, it's not necessarily the density on the site or even the setbacks. For me, it's the break in the pacing of the neighborhood, right? So as you walk through Ferndale neighborhoods, or our neighborhood, I guess in particular, the Marshall neighborhood, right? You're walking along these patios where you're not looking directly into a unit, but you can see your neighbors on their patios, right, on their front porch, and in these smaller, 6-unit, let's call them, multifamily developments, which I think offer the affordability and the scale that we really want in Ferndale. We break up that pattern, that pattern of patios. Planning people, please save me from myself because this is not.
Is it the porches?
Yeah, the porches, right?
I think of a patio as being at grade and a porch being elevated.
Have now these multifamily units,
right?
These at grade patios, which I think draws your eye to the density of the building, the mass of the building, as opposed to having the similar setback and porches with the same pacing that you have throughout the rest of the neighborhood, right? We have lots of big homes, right, that are, maybe slightly smaller than some of these larger multifamily projects. But the thing that I think really breaks up the walk for me is the change in the pacing of porches and patios, and the height difference between those two, and how that engages the pedestrian.
So did I hear a trade-off between more accessible units and sort of the aesthetic of the neighborhood flow?
I think that those are two things, and I don't know that they're mutually exclusive, right? In the Planning Commission, we certainly want to take accessibility into consideration, but what we hear from the community who attends those meetings is really around density and mass on the site, and not necessarily the ADA compliance. And so when I'm walking through my neighborhood and seeing these multifamily developments, I'm thinking about that, the massing of the site, and not necessarily the ADA compliance. So I wanted to piggyback on her comments, but I know that the two things often can't coexist.
Were those, I know which ones we're talking about, Justin, Aaron, Jordan, are those MXD, or are they R3?
No, they're R2.
R2?
R3.
I know that when we were rewriting,
40999 was a PUD. Parkdale Towns was.
but the project Brittany's talking about on Vester.
Oh,
Wasn't it R3?
R3, okay. Because I think in one of our sets of edits to either MXD or CBD, we require porches or stoops or what we called porticos, which are at-grade entries. Michelle looks like she has some.
Sorry to interrupt you,
intel.
Kathleen. Just for the public's education, MXD, R3, R2, we're just talking about zoning districts. So the specific zoning district and the particular restrictions on the development per the zoning code. So.
Yeah. Sorry, I get all nerdy out here. This is why we have people to interpret my jargon. So I can't remember where in the zoning ordinance, but we wrote standards for that.
Urban flex downtown.
It's in the downtown urban flex district, so maybe we look at applying a similar architectural standard to the R3, R2 neighboring districts.
Yeah, one of the goals of the last master plan was to move toward, and I'll use another jargony term, sorry, but form-based codes, so that you're looking more at the things that Brittany was just talking about in terms of the sort of the rhythm and the form, as opposed to exactly what the function is of the building. And our first form-based code, which Kathleen worked on, was downtown, but the intent in the last master plan was to extend that out further into other districts. So I'll be interested to see if that's still a priority in this next master plan.
And also, when it comes to multifamily houses, ADA isn't a choice. ADA is law. You have to follow 5% of all housing, I think it is, in multifamily areas have to be ADA accessible. And so it's not like an apartment can just choose to discriminate against someone who's not as able.
What do you feel? So did you say 5%?
I think it's 5%. I did a quick internet search, so I can't attest to
Yeah.
that.
What
Okay.
we're hearing in the community is that's not enough. Like we're not meeting demand. So with ADA accessible, and so our Accessibility and Inclusion Commission would like to see some policies change that encourages more, because there's so few in the community that are accessible.
And is the reason Parkdale Towns doesn't have any is because they aren't technically multifamily units, they're attached single family? Okay.
To my knowledge, they're not considered multifamily. A townhome is a special land use in Ferndale.
So while we're on the topic of ADA and accessibility, I think one thing that I would like for us to strive for, this isn't specific to these plans, but it's not just ADA compliance, but ADA excellence or some other
Like universal design.
Yeah. And not always, because one of the things that I'm thinking about are how many homeowners are looking for multi-generational houses, and want to share their space with a family member who may or may not use a wheelchair, but want to be able to maintain a first floor existence without going up and down a lot.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, you go ahead, Deb. I haven't. Please go ahead.
No, all I was going to add, in the respect of what you wish had gone differently on both 409 and Parkdale towns, we had a lot of meetings about those projects, and what came up over and over again from the neighborhood, from the community, was density, the height, and the parking. And while what I'm going to bring up might not be directly addressed by the master plan, I think there's a disconnect between what we plan, as this group, and then when a resident who may not pay attention to it a lot has a project in their community and is first confronted with it. Because with Parkdale Towns, that's too many units. There's not enough parking for the park still. It's going to add too many people to our neighborhood. The cars are going to go too fast. And everyone felt like it was the first time they'd seen any of it, ever heard about it, and it was quite a challenge. There were a lot of meetings about that and trying to figure out how to dovetail, how to reconnect the community with what some of us may take for granted that's what's in the ordinance or that's what's in the master plan. 409 had a similar concept where it's very tall, quote unquote, if you're living behind it, and throwing those shadows. And so for me, what do I wish had gone differently? It's that initial pre-planning or helping the average community member understand what's coming and how we bridge that gap between what we plan here and what your average community member may not be looking at until it hits their backyard.
Do you feel like there's more space for community members to weigh in on what type of things those will be, even if they're in compliance, or is there more space for community benefits with some of these new developments? So you mentioned something like the shadows being cast. Like, do you think that there's space for residents to weigh in on how that's going to play out?
I would hope that in this round of the master planning, the community is only going to take as much notice or interest as they want to at the time. It's more important when the project actually comes to their backyard and they're forced to see it. So it's a hard question to answer. I don't know how we better communicate with the average member of the public what we're coming up with today here and how that might impact them in the future.
I think my question is about, there may be there's a question of notifying people so they know what to expect, and then there's a question of sort of integrating them into the process. And so do you see either one of those things playing out differently in a specific way as we go forward?
Not to get totally off topic, and if I am, just rein me back in, but I think of, like on the city website, it'll, give little updates about, there's rain expected tonight, clean out drains and do little things like that. It's almost if we had a community outreach of, this is what MXD means, or, these are the heights that you can expect in this area. That might almost be a pop-up or a meeting, just so that people understand, like, this is what this is zoned, this is what that means. And going forward, hopefully it's less of a surprise.
Are you saying like kind of a did you know scrolling kind of thing? Did you know?
Yeah.
Da, 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 da. Did you know? Da, 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 da. That just kind of every 5 seconds rolls?
Who knows who might catch that or read that, but I remember how upset the people behind, for the 409 just the idea of shadow casting and coming with those models and showing what that looked like. And, there's a lot of discussion about that's so much taller than my house. Looking at it and even if after it's built, it's not as bad as it may seem, that initial concept of there's going to be a building that's 40 or 70 feet tall next to my house, and it's instant outrage rather than understanding that that's a possibility.
So, yeah, no, Deb, thanks for bringing that up. I think that's like my biggest, I guess I sort of said that when we were talking about our main vision for the master plan, but I think you just put it so well. That is our exact problem, that that's what I would love to see, because, we're all so busy and there's so many things going on that being involved in a master plan process might not be our top priority at the time, but then when a development comes to your neighborhood, it's sometimes too late because it might be a by right development. And so this is the time, and this is why we have this master plan process, but it can be difficult to engage the public, and so that's always been a struggle, not just in Ferndale, but we've seen it. I used to be a consultant with Kathleen. We used to, see it in all communities.
Yeah, and with an architectural or a planning or, some type of background that you kind of know what's going on, what zoning is. I'm explaining to family members and friends all the time who they never do any of this and they don't understand. And even just the brief conversation that I might have with someone, even not from Ferndale, about, oh, well, that's why this project is XYZ and this is what zoning is and this is what you can expect. They come down a notch because they realize, oh, well, that's allowed, or that was what I should have expected. And it brings them down a notch before they really launch in.
I would agree. I think it's a constant balance of providing some predictability to the development community and also being responsive to the feedback that we're hearing in the planning commission meetings, because I think we have a very participatory planning meetings. Yes. I will say, compared to other municipalities that I've attended, we get lots of public participation for every single agenda item, and which is great in making sure that the community feels heard and seen and involved. But oftentimes that is taking us into conversations about elements of the project that is very likely by right at this point, and it's parking, mass, density, setback, build 2 lines, right? And not necessarily some of the other things that we've been discussing today.
And going out the morning before the planning commission meeting and saying, oh yeah, I talked to the neighborhood, I didn't meet a lot of people, no one was home and it was the day before. Like setting a standard for what would be expected for what engaging the community before a meeting looks like.
And then also creating some ground rules, right, where there's an opportunity for engaging the community, but there's also like a safe space, right, that through the master planning process, we've agreed to density and build 2 lines and right, like the basic zoning that we all agree to, so that the developer doesn't find themselves constantly discussing those items in planning commission meetings or even a community benefits process, right, that has become standardized in many communities. It's a balance, right?
Yeah, so I would say that, so I've heard like education, I think it's a big component of it. Implementing our communication or our public engagement within the zoning process. But then I would just say thank you to all the public that's here tonight and listening, because I think we also have to put some onus on the individual community members to engage. And so I hope that we can spread that word and get people engaged in this process, and that's what I'm just really hoping for. I mean, all of us are volunteer members and we care about these issues, and that's why we're here tonight. That's why we serve on these committees, and we're so thankful for all the people that do come to our planning commission meetings. So I just want to make sure that that is what we're really hoping for in this master plan process.
Agreed.
And I think off of the topic of engagement, engaging in the right forums, coming to planning commission, participating in the master land use planning, coming to city council meetings, that's how you engage. Going on a Ferndale Facebook group and just throwing out whatever you want to and starting a ball rolling of a lot of facts or made up facts or whatever doesn't actually accomplish anything. So come here, have discussions, learn the facts, and then grow from there. That's what we need you all to do.
I really like the concept of educating the community members. I think it's really important, so I like what you both had to say regarding that. But I just also want to point out that no matter how many times that you try to engage and no matter how many times you try to explain, there are people that are going to take this concept in a totally different way. Like I can tell you right now that when I look at blueprints and I think, wow, that looks like that's going to be great, and it looks totally different from what I thought it was going to be. So I think we're always going to have that fine line about people feeling like, no, I don't want this because it's going to look this way, but then you like it because it's finally up, or it's up and I hate it, But I just, education is key, but just we have to keep in mind that, in short, everybody's not going to be pleased. And we can only do the best we can is to try to explain and make sure we get out there and engage the community as much as possible. And yes, thank you all for being here tonight, because that's wonderful. But I would have liked to have seen more here tonight. So that's just.
They're online.
Yeah. I'm gonna do a gentle mindfulness pause here. We do have call to audience on our agenda, and we should probably leave 10 minutes for that.
Right. Aaron, did you have something to say earlier, or were you just standing up to stretch? Just standing to stretch. Okay. Yeah. So let's. Yeah.
Did you have
Kat, did you have
I was just gonna say, it feels like we're circling and identifying one of those trade-offs or points of tension between affordability, undoing racist zoning, mixed use and walkability, and climate adaptation, redevelopment on one hand, and on the other hand, community tradition and comfort and sense of stability. That merging those is really difficult.
Yeah. Agreed. I think that leads me into one final question before we wrap up, which Ryan will lead us through. That final question is, what can we're going to hear that from the public, and we're going to hear that in October, and we already know that is the balancing act, is tradition, keeping our small town charm. How do we blend the two? So I'm curious to end this slide's discussion before we wrap up and move to public comment. How do we get people to talk about this stuff in a safe space kind of way? We have some ideas, but what do we need to know going into the next couple of months of opening up the conversation to the public to try to balance those two needs? Are there any tips or ideas or key topics that you want to make sure that we know about, because we talked about a lot tonight, and a lot of it's reinforcing some suspicions we had, but I want to be like, hit that straight on, be like, how do we talk about these things? And what other potential landmines are awaiting us?
So if I may, on the topic of getting people engaged, we cannot expect them to be here. I struggled to get here this evening. In addition, there are so many people who are uncomfortable with this environment. They're uncomfortable with speaking in front of other people. We have to give them an outlet, and I know social media is not the best outlet because it's an echo chamber and it just exacerbates the worst in us and amplifies it. But giving them a conduit online, perhaps, or call-ins, or a board that they can post to in some way, shape, or form that may be interactive, anything like that, so that we don't have to rely on this space or a public forum or anything of that nature. It would do a world of good.
It's planned. It's coming. Look for it soon on planferndale.com.
I'm totally with Laura on that. One of the most amazing pieces of engagement, and I know Raylon was very involved in this, that I've seen in my now like 15 years of doing this, was the senior citizen survey that went out talking about a broad number of things, but a lot that had to do with land use planning, to 1,500 people who were over a certain age in the city of Ferndale at the time, a couple years ago. We had a 500-piece response to a mailing. Like, older people open their mail, they write things down, and they return them. The Planning Commission helps do data entry. That's how valuable this was and how overwhelming the response was, that we volunteered to do data entry so that we could help use some of this information for planning and zoning. So don't discount.
How long ago was that?
Probably 3 years.
It was 2015. And
before the last
holy cow, 2015.
I'll tell you why.
Because it was last master plan, that's why she remembers.
But it was my grandmother's 98 and she does not have the internet, so she will absolutely fill out a survey. She will not go to a www anything.
If I may, also, I would like to see, we're losing families with kids still. I would like to see us engage our high schoolers and more families with children in a more creative way. And I've seen some things at festivals. The city of Detroit has done sort of a planning, block type of engagement with kids, and you engage your family in a certain way when they're there. These are just some ideas that I think that we should be considering. Even though we have a high schooler on our steering committee, I think we need more creative ways to get that type of input for the master plan.
I like where you're going with that. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for us to have one of these sessions and invite families with their kids and maybe have people help kind of corral the kids while the parents are interacting with you guys.
We've definitely done that before and had babysitters. I think COVID is going to prevent that, unfortunately. And so we're losing our...
Game. I don't know.
Right.
We go to the events.
We're going to have to go to them, I think, in an outdoor space somehow soon. Marching band, there we go.
I'll play the drum.
I'll bring my pom-poms. Okay.
I have a daughter on the team, so
okay.
You know what the games are.
Sounds good.
I think there might be a particular opportunity, though, with young families. I think the families with kids in high school, those are families that chose to stay and invest in this school district. I think it's the young families who are having to make the choice about school districts and choosing where to ultimately.
Yeah, am I going to stay here for a few more years when they start school?
And maybe that's coordinating with some of the younger family organizations that have opened up, especially along like Hilton. There's quite a few of them all of a sudden, and coordinating with them and seeing who's coming to that and getting in touch with those people.
What is this thing on Hilton? What?
There's several of them now. There's one that's like a
childcare thing or like an association.
Well, there was a childcare place. There was a place for younger kids. There's a place with families who have kids who may have learning challenges or disabilities. There's a mommy group place. There's a bunch of different ones now.
Yeah, Honey for Moms, Life Lab Kids,
Nature's Playhouse.
Yep.
Nature's Playhouse on the Run.
And I think this is really important because it's going to cross over to the Parks and Rec engagement too. I mean, it's just not the master plan here. And we've got some real tough questions about our, community facilities around parks and
Right.
recreation.
That's a really good point that hasn't come up yet, that I'm glad you brought that up. Let's wrap up with one more.
Great, so as we wrap up, we talked a lot about those hot button issues, the trade-offs, and so knowing that you have to make trade-offs, and you're all representing, residents, constituents, think about those the priorities of your constituents, and knowing that, what is your number one priority and goal for this master plan as you think about those trade-offs and what your constituents want to see?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah.
Oh, there it is.
Okay.
I got it.
Yes, sorry. Okay, so we talked about trade-offs, this versus that. Thinking about the people that you're representing and that you're here on behalf of, thinking about their priorities. What do you want to make sure comes through in this master plan as a representative of residents of Ferndale? Does that make more sense?
Well, it does, but I have to say that that's really difficult because, especially these last 10 years, Ferndale has really transformed itself, a couple of times. There's probably a third of the people who live in Ferndale now that weren't around when we did the last master use plan. So for you to say, what do I think their wants are, to me, that's what this is. This is telling me what their wants are, and then I can determine what their trade-offs. But I don't think I can tell you today what that trade-off is going to be when I don't know what their want is.
Okay, so maybe let's think about it like this. We will be having engagement sessions, but you all talked about things that you'd already heard about parking, about retail, about accessibility. I heard a lot tonight about what people kept saying and what you always hear about. So what are those things that you need to bring forward in this plan that's going to represent those desires that you always hear?
May I offer the first thought? The master plan is supposed to be a blueprint of how your community is going to grow. And I would say during the Great Recession, there was no growth. So we made some progress, but it wasn't, really actionable in a way that I think everybody thought was going to happen. So I would say for me, this plan really has to set and be very clear visually that things are going to be different. Doing more housing in single-family neighborhoods and addressing the racist zoning of the past, that's a big deal. That's a game changer. And it's going to change how neighborhoods look. So for me, it's being very clear about what the future could look like. And then, because a master plan is all about diving into the policy points, how do we make snapshots of what are hard things ahead? Like, what are the hard things ahead? And it's housing, it's climate. And that's going to affect the decision-making and investments of the community. But the residents need to understand those are the hard things ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
For me, so it's actually would be prioritizing values of the community. So I'm actually mixing the words around in your question to be the answer. Because oftentimes we hear feedback of, well, we want to keep Ferndale. Well, what does that mean? And so, Brittany gave us a great example of how she said it was difficult, but when she was walking, what really is it that I feel like I'm missing? And we have to really ask and dig and dive down into, well, what are we feel like we're missing something, but what is it? And she was able to express, it's the porch. So we, but it's difficult. It's so difficult. And I think it's difficult for all of us to be like, okay, well, what do we love about Ferndale? And what is it specifically? And how does that relate to the built environment? And what do I want to maintain and build on? And then, what am I okay with changing? because we have to make decisions because there is going to be development, there is going to be change that is, the standard of life change. So how can we really hear and understand what the community values? What is it specifically that we can use that to then make decisions moving forward?
Is there anybody else?
Oh, I was going to ask if you want us to just keep going around.
Yes. Oh, you don't necessarily have to go in order. You can popcorn.
Does anybody have any other comments?
I was just going to say predictability. I think that our community can be progressive and
Microphone, Brittany, please. Thank you.
Yep. I think our community can be progressive and make changes to meet some of those demands, and still be predictable to the residents and knowing what's going to be built, could be built around them and will be built around them, to the development community to know where are the hard lines for us, and for the planning commission to be able to articulate that and enforce them, and for our community, all residents, to really know what the direction we're marching in. So just some predictability for everybody.
I would like to work off of Michelle's comment, and that's, I've heard a lot of people say that my taxes are too high, I don't like big development, and what's the third thing?
No parking.
No, that too, but yeah. No, but I don't want big development. I don't want to pay, more taxes. But I love my city services. Those are awesome. Well, you can't maintain the current tax base and not allow any development and expect all of your services to continue at the same level year after year after year. Things always increase. So if you don't increase the tax base, which means more development, then you're not going to get more taxes. That means your taxes are going to go up. Or you don't raise your taxes, you don't have development, and your services go down. So there's that happy medium that we have to make sure, and I think that that's what we've tried to do. Moving forward, I think the give is going to be, you're going to see more medium-sized development happening in smaller neighborhoods. You're going to see, 4, 5, 6 family units being built in a street where it's all one-family homes. It's either that or we need to build bigger development, but we can't just maintain going forward on the same tax base and providing the same level of services. So that's what I have to say.
So maybe we are thinking about how do we increase the tax base, but also, from what I heard from other people, it's also how to maintain the character of Ferndale. So change is going to come, everyone is saying, but how does that change come in a way that residents can predict, understand, and possibly, hopefully, get behind and maintain their standard of life? Please continue.
If I may, I'm just going to play off of what you said, because I wrote down 3 trade-offs that I hear over and over again. Green space versus development, improvements versus budget, and funky versus soulless, which is a pretty aggressive way of describing it. But I really couldn't think of any other way to just define that we are funky Ferndale, and we all know it, but what does it mean? And why do people see development as soulless? Every time that we have one of these, the Parkdale towns or the 409 on 9, there's a knee-jerk reaction to it. But why? Is it massing? Is it the design overall? Is it the impact to the way that their life is? What is it about it that isn't funky? And why is it such a visceral reaction?
What was your second one?
Improvements versus budget, which again goes back to what you said. The most common complaint I hear is that we are no longer affordable, and that those families that we want to attract and retain, when they grow out of a home that may be 2 bedrooms or maybe a cute little bungalow, when they have a couple kids, they can't buy a house here because they're just not at that income level. If the house is $300,000, the tax impact is too severe, and it makes more sense to move to a different town and And then green space versus development. Again, I think we have a very strong love of green space in this area, and that goes back to our parks, but it also goes back to the frontage in front of homes, the difference between lawns and gardens. So when we see things like the Parkdale townhomes, is that one of the reasons that there was a visceral reaction there? Because it's just grass and pear trees and crab apples, and there's no thought, there's no depth to that design. It's just something that checks a box. We've got 100 trees, we check the box, let's move on. And I think if we can figure out how to rectify those trade-offs or meet in the middle, we'll have some really happy people.
Anybody else? All right. Do you want to?
Yeah, I had.
Oh,
but
good.
the commission did.
I'm mindful of our time.
Yes. The other thing that I always remind myself, having grown up in this community and then buying my first and so far only house in this community, is the change that I've already seen in my lifetime, and the evolution into Funky Ferndale, which trust me, we were not when I was a kid. Change in my lifetime that has been for the better, that is sort of continuing to push our city and our region forward and in new directions. I think about that arc and where we're going next, and that we wouldn't be Funky Ferndale and we wouldn't be a place that people are fighting for if we hadn't changed in the last couple of decades. So that change and evolution has been really important in our community.
Last call, anyone? Mayor?
All right. I am now going to conclude the open and flexible discussion of the workshop and move on to the call to audience. And call to audience, we need you on the microphone, so if you could go up to the dais, the podium there, and have 3 minutes, that would be great. Please state your name and your street name if you don't want to say your whole address.
You guys all know me. Blake Shear, 264 Withington. Just an early on thought was Kat was talking about the word healthy, and I was thinking maybe we should change that word to safe. Safe streets, ADA compliant, etc. I didn't write anything down. The last thing was the zoning, which we talk about education with the zoning. Like, no one knows that when they go to buy their house. We go to buy our house, it's probably one of the biggest things we purchase in our lifetime. And then all of a sudden, we found out an apartment complex is going to be built next door. I think that's something we need to look at, and we need to think about that. And maybe we need to revisit the zoning overall. That's all.
Thanks, Blake.
Hi, I'm Lynn Clark-Geiner. I live on Pinecrest across from the development that didn't happen, so I'm across from the forest, thankfully. And I do have to say that the last Planning Commission meeting I came to, I was so impressed. I came to many before this implementation of the Planning Commission, and what you guys stood up for and what you said, I was so impressed. One of the things that I've noticed in this meeting is I think we need to change the language on how you address us as residents. I'm part of the steering committee. I'm the old resident on the steering committee. And often you say, just a resident. They're just a resident. They're not part of this club. We're just residents. And that, I almost got up and left. It pissed me off that bad. So, and that's how I'm wired. I forwarded to everybody on the steering committee, which is, I think, all of you, the Park and Rec plan from the town I grew up in, which addresses a lot of ways that we could engage the community. It's a really robust program, so if you would all look at, it's a beautiful brochure that I sent all of you. It would give you a lot of ideas on things that we could do to engage the community. They did an Olympics, and people came out and they competed in lip syncing, and they have tournaments with other cities, and it brings the community together. And when my husband, who you all know is very opinionated, came to my high school reunion in my town, which is Kearney, Nebraska, he was so impressed with the community feel and how everybody liked each other and how they all worked together and the respect they had for each other. And it was because of the Park and Rec program. And I feel that's really lacking here in Ferndale. I also think that our website sucks. It's hard to navigate. I've gone on there before, and if you don't have the actual link to what you want to get to, you can't find it. And the website that they use, it's a program, and I sent it to you. They can update it easily. So I think that's something we need to look at. We need to change the website so that people can actually go on it. And it's so hard to talk in these freaking masks.
You're doing great.
And one more thing is, and I had said this in the steering committee, and thank you for addressing it when we were talking, that when you talk to the community and you start using acronyms, my brain just goes, no. I work in entertainment. I work in fashion. You can't tell right now. But so if I'm speaking my language, my husband doesn't understand a thing I'm saying. So you need to bear that in mind when you're talking to the public, because if I got pissed like that by being addressed as just a resident, they're going to too. And once they shut down, you're not going to re-engage them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So a few notes that I took. One is,
Can you state your name and your address?
Oh, Dave Cottrell, 1610 Bowfield.
Thank you.
Just in one way to perhaps inform the resident of like, what is how are they zoned? Perhaps it could be on the tax bill or something, they'd receive regularly from the city. Okay, you're R1, you're R2, you're R3, and then perhaps even like the adjacent property, like if you happen to be living on Withington or West Saratoga. Oh, by the way, on West 9 Mile, it's a central business district, and that could be zoned for a 7-story building. And I think that's one of the things that's driving some people out of the neighborhoods. They recognize, I'm going to be living next to a 7-story building. I wanted to live in a village, not like Manhattan. So that's what drives some people out. I think that's happened in some people in West Saratoga, west of Allen. Another idea is that Ferndale really was built as a multi-economic city. As I've read, it's like based on a Cincinnati plan. You have Northwest Ferndale, like our more upper income, Southwest. East side tended to be more working class. It also, when I read the history book in Ferndale, East side tended to be Southern whites, and West side tended to be like Northern whites. And I believe like in year 10 in Hilton, it ended up being a black neighborhood. That's when I've done some campaigns, that's what I've heard. And so it's always been like it was designed as a multi-ethnic and multi-economic area. That's one of the benefits of Ferndale. I'd like to see people encouraged to stay here a long time. The joke used to be that living in Ferndale for a long time was 4 generations, and I've talked to people who said, people used to sell the house to their neighbors or to their children, and I still see some of that. And you get some really long, stable neighborhoods that way, and I'm really glad that one of my neighbors is being able to buy the house next door, so their father-in-law can live right next to them. So we get multi-generational housing by having two houses right next to each other. And it's really the connectivity in the neighborhoods is probably one of the most important parts of Ferndale. Where people know each other, they walk past each other, they talk. In my neighborhood, we had outside movies, house concerts, yoga classes. So the tightly knit blocks that really make the community. So those are just some of my ideas and comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Hi there.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zoe Bacher. I live on Woodland Street East in smell distance of New York Bagel. And looking around the room, I think it's fair to say I'm probably the youngest person here. And for me, when thinking of a plan that's going to be leading us for a long time, I love the words sustainability, resilience. I think designing with climate change in mind is one of my most important things to think about in every aspect of my life. But in terms of what I see as some of the biggest issues in Ferndale today that I think could be addressed by some of our plans, it's safety for people moving in Ferndale in all ways. I remember reading an interview with our mayor saying that one of the most common things she hears from residents is that we feel unsafe on Woodward, on other streets. Say personally, I almost get hit by a car probably like once a week. While running, while biking, while walking. And one of the things that I think I would want to be thought about with this master plan that is a word that I think is missing. And this may be, for me, who doesn't have to think about the nitty-gritty of things, a little fanciful, but I like the word joyful. And so I'd like to say some things that bring me joy about Ferndale would be seeing my neighbor skateboard down the street, seeing like 40 kids at the skate park taking their turn, little kids on the playgrounds, seeing my neighbors take their 2-year-old to the park in Pleasant Ridge, because I live very close to that park, and that is our park. And anything that we can do to make that more accessible, easier, safer, that's what I want to see. And I know that this is a little off topic, but while I have a public forum, I would like to make a comment on a story that was in the news today about allegations against our police department. I think it's very serious what was alleged. A woman had to endure on it sounds like for reasons that she didn't even need to be stopped, to be searched by someone who was not of her gender, she didn't want to be. And I know that we talked about this last year in the wake of many protests to have a citizen oversight board for our police. I'd like to renew discussions and the need for that. I'm not at these meetings all the time, so I don't know what goes on there, but wanted to have that while we're here talking.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mcmackin. I actually live across the street at 409 on 9. Agree with most of what was said about that development. I've been there for a year now. I'm actually going to re-sign my lease, not completely because I want to. I'm a little bit forced to. I have 2 large dogs, so that kind of eliminates 75% of the housing options for me, along with the price point. I will be perfectly honest, I spend half of my income on rent alone. Probably not a good financial option, but for the lifestyle that I want compared to what I've had in the past, it's worth it to me to budget that and to be in Ferndale and to be in the location that I'm at. I will say I found such a sense of community, not just in Ferndale, but like in my building, made so many great friends, dog moms and others. And previous to that, I was living down on Channing Street, and it was just completely different experience. I had good neighbors. I was renting a house by myself. It was nice to be able to rent a home. It was more affordable for me, but I gave up a lot for the type of house I was living in. And so I think just
making sure that we spread that sense of community to other areas, like down on Channing. I didn't feel safe to walk downtown and meet my friend for dinner. I'd have to drive, and that comes back to the parking thing. So if it doesn't feel safe to walk, you're going to drive, and you're going to need that parking. So it all circles back. So I think just sense of community and safety were really kind of the main points that I would like to hit on tonight. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. Is there anybody else like to give public comment tonight? Do we have one online?
No, but they can raise their hand if they want.
Is anybody on Zoom that would like to make a comment? Please raise your blue hand in Zoom, and our Assistant City Manager, Kyle, will bring you into the speaker overhead. Hi, Sean.
Hi, I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for having this meeting. I agree with, I thought the presentation was really nice, well put together, but thank you for having this. I think the idea of having community summits later on this is a very good idea. Definitely, I'll keep my comments brief. I definitely echo the sentiment that Woodward needs to be made safer. I think it's way too many lanes. It's dangerous to cross. I live at 8 Mile and Woodward, so that intersection is a little, that is definitely an issue. Yeah, just for future development, I definitely agreed that we should have more neighbors. It would be cool to have more people live in Ferndale. I would like to see, more of my friends be able to afford places here. I am worried that I would not be able to buy something here, so it would be nice to have more affordable housing options here in Ferndale. But that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Hi, Ruth. Hi, Ruth. Are you there? Hello? Ruth, are you unmuted? Hi, Ruth. Well, it seems like we're having some technical difficulties with you, Ruth. If you wanted to make a comment, I encourage you to write an email. You can send it to Ferndale City Council at ferndalemi.gov or call any of us with your comments, and we can parlay that over to the staff here in the Planning Commission. All right, folks. Anybody else? Is that it? Okay, that is everybody in the council chambers and on Zoom who have raised their hands for call to audience, and so I'm going to close that now, and then I'm going to just close with a couple comments. I think this was a great meeting. It's been a while since the Planning Commission and City Council has gotten together to have this type of workshop, and I thought it was very productive and well managed. And I really appreciate everybody giving up an extra night out of their week to come and attend and participate, because the big project of I call it the planning trifecta, the master plan, climate action plan, and the Parks and Rec plan. Having them doing them all at once is really intensive for staff, but I think there's so much overlap that happens in conversations and needs and values and ideas. Really is, for me, a better opportunity for the community to have a sort of a brain dump of ideas and thoughts into this project and bring it all together. I'm really glad that this happened at the beginning of this project, and I hope that the Planning Commission commissioners feel comfortable contacting every city council member throughout this process. If you have any issues, concerns, questions, or just want to chat about the engagement process or any policies, we are always open to chat as we go through looking at how we could do things differently in the future and parlay what we're hearing from our community into new policies going into the future. So thank you again for coming. Thank you, staff, for spending another night with us and preparing for this meeting. And thank you to Kathleen and everybody for being here and running an effective workshop for us. With that, I'm adjourning the meeting tonight at 8:45.
Recording stopped.